All right, and we are back here on the GSMC Sports Podcast. And for the fourth part of the show, we're going to now talk about Myles Garrett and him rejecting a contract extension from the Browns recently. And we talked about this on Friday in the production meeting, but when you see the Browns offer Myles Garrett this huge contract and he doesn't want it, it's basically telling you that he really wants out. He wants to win. And he's been with Cleveland for a long time. A couple of years where they made the playoffs. But other than that, the Browns have been very disappointing. It was a complete 180. In 2024, it was a complete 180 of the previous year, right? And he's just had enough. Garrett's camp has slammed the door shut on negotiations for a new contract with the Browns. And ESPN confirmed this on Thursday. He is not open to a new contract. And he requested a trade earlier in the offseason. And he has talked about wanting to win a Super Bowl. He doesn't want to be complacent. He's been with the Browns for 8 years. It's time to... He believes it's time for him to go somewhere else. And the Browns, they don't want to trade him. They want to keep him because he is a cornerstone of their franchise. But he's had enough. He's had enough. And it's amazing how fast his contract went because he signed a 5-year contract back in 2020 and it's close to being done already. And he doesn't want to be part of a rebuild, and that's kind of where the Browns are at right now. This Deshaun Watson deal really set them back. And in a way, you can't really blame the Browns for what they did because they thought that they were getting an upgrade at quarterback over Baker Mayfield. They really did. They thought they were getting a much better player in Deshaun Watson than what they have gotten. But, between all the off-the-field stuff and, think about it. He sat out for a whole year. And then he comes back, and he was very rusty, and then he just, when he plays, he wasn't very good, and then he would get hurt. Injuries have been a problem. Back-to-back years with season-ending injuries. And on top of that, the same injury that he suffered, it happened again in a span of several months. And now the Browns are just in a tough spot. And yeah, it's time that they, go in a different direction with quarterback. Like I said, I was willing to give Deshaun Watson at least, I guess, one more chance to be the starting quarterback. And he got hurt. And even before he got hurt, he was not playing well. So, it's time to go in a different direction with quarterback. Now he's expected to miss a lot of time. To be honest, I would be surprised if he plays another down of football. I really would. Because if the Browns draft a quarterback and you sign a veteran, and that's what you do for 2025. And if they somehow can cut ties with Deshaun Watson, who's picking him up? Who's picking him up? I don't think anybody is. So that's something that we got to see what happens down the line. But for right now, with Myles Garrett, it's just he's been frustrated with how this team has been. Things started to turn around with Baker Mayfield. They got rid of him. They brought in Deshaun Watson, and it's just flopped. So he wants to go to a team that can win a championship. And you hear that, who knows, the Eagles? Could you imagine the Eagles getting Myles Garrett? Put him on that defense? We saw what that defense did in the Super Bowl against Patrick Mahomes. Now, and they didn't blitz Patrick Mahomes once. Now you're talking about trading for one of the best defensive players, one of the best edge rushers in the league, and you put him on that defense, it's game over. Now, I don't know if that's going to happen, but you do hear that, and you're thinking, oh no, please no. But the Eagles are a team that they could figure it out and do it. Why not? If the Eagles want to become that next dynasty, they'd trade assets and get Myles Garrett. Why not? But it will come down to money, because how are they going to be able to afford that contract? But if they were to do it. And we have a fellow GSMC host in the chat, Mr. Eric, who does a great job hosting the Wrestling Lawyerette podcast. Also won a weekly prize in my CBS spread pool. He asks, so if Garrett is destined to leave, does that alter the Browns' draft strategy? I think they'll go for Ashton Genty and sign Daniel Jones. Ha ha ha, Browns tanking. Yeah, listen, I don't think with their pick, I mean, it looks like, I talked about this earlier in the show, they look like they're set on taking a quarterback at 2. Now, running back's interesting because it doesn't look like they're going to bring back Nick Chubb. He could be going elsewhere. So maybe with this running back class the way it is, they can maybe go out and draft a running back. I mean, the defense, if they get rid of Myles Garrett, like if they get rid of Myles Garrett before the draft, and you know what? It's possible because we've seen big trades happen during the draft. We talked about this on Friday in the production meeting. You know, you had the A.J. Brown trade happen. We could very well see the Browns maybe trade Myles Garrett during the draft, and maybe they take, an edge rusher or something. Maybe they take Abdul Carter with the number 2 pick. Well, I shouldn't say that because now with the news coming out that, he's dealing with a bit of a foot injury, he could potentially slide. And maybe the Eagles take Abdul Carter. Maybe the Eagles get Abdul Carter and they trade for Myles Garrett. Could you imagine that? Nah, it's not going to happen. But the Browns, I think, are set on taking a quarterback. Daniel Jones, it's interesting where he could potentially end up. During the combine, Eric's saying during the combine, Jackson Dart looked good. Listen, I hope that's, for me, I want the Giants to take one of the top players and then maybe try to get a Jackson Dart in the second round. Now, it's easier said than done, but that's just my way of thinking at the moment. But I did watch a little bit of the combine. I just really can't get into it, They did talk a lot about Shedeur Sanders and how he wasn't throwing, but I just really couldn't get into it. I did watch the 40-yard dash. With the receivers. One of the quarterbacks actually ended up running it too. But yeah, I really can't get into it. And if I want to watch the highlights of these players, if I want to get tape on these players, watch the the highlights and the all 22, which I don't have access to. But yeah, that's how I would that's how I would watch it. Watch those guys. But I did have it on in the background just to have it on, but yeah, I really cannot get into it. So but yeah, we'll see what happens. But yeah, I think the Browns, they're going to take a quarterback, and then I don't know. I don't know what's going to happen. But the other thing too is, back to with Myles Garrett, if the Browns don't want to trade him, are we going to have like a Hassan Reddick situation? Now, a little bit different because Hassan Reddick wanted a new contract. Myles Garrett wants to get traded and then get a new contract. He wants that new team to give him a new contract because he doesn't want a new contract with the Browns. So, could it be like Myles Garrett doesn't get traded and then, he ends up just holding out and not playing? Is that what's going to happen? And then that's where, you start to lose me a little bit. That's when you enter that slippery slope. Because while I understand why players hold out, you don't want it to be, now I brought up Hassan Reddick, but another situation, you don't want it to be a Le'Veon Bell situation where, and we are far away from getting to that point, but you do not want to get to that point where you are missing games. Well, Hassan Reddick ended up missing games too, but Le'Veon Bell missed an entire season because he wanted a new contract, and he was never the same player. If you're Myles Garrett, are you really going to risk holding out and potentially missing an entire season if the Browns don't trade you? I think I'm talking about this very soon. But you don't want to get to that point. And I don't think it will. But it has happened before. And it doesn't, and it only hurts the player, in my opinion. Especially if you're holding out an entire year. And it's not like Hassan Reddick, when he came back for the Jets, did Hassan Reddick do anything? But Hassan Reddick is also not Myles Garrett. So, while I understand why players hold out, it also can negatively impact you. But we'll see what happens. You know, I think Myles Garrett is eventually going to force the Browns' hand, and they will have to trade him. And guess what? It's not like you're not going to get a ton of... If you play it right, you should get a ton of assets back. But, you know, then you can also factor in, well, you got to worry about what the fan base thinks and just, you know, I mean, the Browns fans have dealt with a lot over the years. And, you know, it finally seemed like they were turning things around. And now this year happened. And now you got the best player on the team wanting out. And now it's like, well, what's going to happen? They're going to have to pick up the pieces. You know, they're eventually going to have to move him. And where are they going to move him? I don't know. I did bring up the Eagles. I mean, there's going to be plenty of teams, I'm sure, lining up. If they have cap space. I mean, look at the Commanders, too. Commanders could be a team that says, hey, we got the cap space. We just traded for a receiver. Let's trade for a pass rusher. And as a Giant fan, if that happens, well, either way, if he goes to the Eagles or the Commanders, it's a lose-lose situation. But then again, you know, the Cowboys have to deal with it too. So, but let me know what you guys think though about the Myles Garrett situation. Where do you think he potentially ends up? Do you think maybe, you know, he goes back on this and says, you know what, I do want to stay in Cleveland? Or do you think there's no shot? I think there is no shot. He's getting out of here. He's getting out of Cleveland. I don't know where he's going to end up, but at some point the Browns will trade Myles Garrett. Maybe it's on draft night. Who knows? So we are going to take our final break of the show now. When we come back, I will continue my season overviews. We will talk about the Carolina Panthers. So, for one final time today, stick around, and we'll be right back here on the GSMC Sports Podcast.